how mediumship merged with extraterrestrials, a journey through time. Have you ever considered the possibility that the voices some call spiritual might come from somewhere else? Not from the beyond, but from other worlds? For centuries, mediums claimed to hear spirits. Today, many claim to channel extraterrestrial consciousnesses. But what is really happening? Is it cosmic contact, or just the echo of our own mind trying to comprehend the invisible? Stay with me until the end of this video, because you will discover how mediumship, ufology, and science began to intersect in a story that completely changes how we see the supernatural. And at the end, I want you to tell me, do you believe they are watching us or inspiring us from within? The origins of modern spiritualism. Our story begins in 1848 in a small wooden house in Hydesville, upstate New York. Two girls, the Fox sisters, Kate and Margaret, claim to converse with a spirit through knocks on the walls. They develop a code, one knock for yes, two for no. The news spreads like wildfire across North America, and quickly a spiritual movement is born that would be called modern spiritualism. The phenomenon becomes a craze. Aristocratic salons in England and the United States promote mediumistic sessions. Intellectuals, scientists, and even politicians participate in these gatherings. The atmosphere of the time is one of fascination with technology, with the telegraph, with electricity, and people begin to imagine that perhaps death could also be crossed by a kind of invisible communication. A few years later in France, Hippolyte Léon Denisard Rivet, known as Allan Kardec, organizes these ideas and publishes the Spirit's book in 1857. There, he proposes something revolutionary for the time. The world of the dead interacts with the living, and mediums are the translators of this invisible dialogue. Kardec systematizes concepts such as reincarnation, spiritual evolution, and plurality of inhabited worlds. Yes, at that very moment, the idea that other planets could harbor intelligent life was already present in spiritualist thought. The entire 19th century becomes enchanted with tables that move by themselves, pencils that write mysterious messages, and voices emerging in the air during sessions. Photographers try to capture images of ectoplasm, a substance supposedly emanated by mediums. The scientific world divides between fierce skeptics and genuinely curious researchers, such as physicist William Crookes, who investigated medium Florence Cook and claimed to have witnessed inexplicable phenomena. But something even greater was approaching. While mediums looked to the beyond, scientists began to look to the sky. And when the stars began to be studied with more powerful telescopes, a question was born. If there are so many worlds out there, could someone from there be trying to speak with us? Theosophy and the Cosmic Masters. Around 1875, the Theosophical Society emerges, founded by Helena Petrovna Blavatsky, a fascinating woman of Russian origin who traveled the world in search of ancient wisdom. Blavatsky claimed to be in telepathic contact with ascended masters, evolved beings who spiritually guided humanity from places like Tibet and remote regions of the Himalayas. She spoke of Morya, Kuthumi, and other masters, entities that supposedly mastered psychic powers and inhabited both the physical plane and higher dimensions. And here something crucial begins. Blavatsky hinted that these masters did not live only in spiritual planes, but possibly on other planets. In her texts, especially in The Secret Doctrine, published in 1888, she mentions Venus as a spiritually advanced planet, a source of cosmic wisdom. It was there that the first seed of cosmic spirituality was born, the idea that the universe is inhabited by intelligences that communicate in a subtle way, not technological, but mental and telepathic. Decades later, English mystic Alice Bailey continues this tradition. Between 1919 and 1949, she channels a series of books attributed to a Tibetan master named Djwhal Khul. Bailey writes about energy rays, planetary spiritual hierarchies, the age of Aquarius, and the evolution of human consciousness. Her works become pillars of the New Age movement that would explode in the 60s and 70s. Bailey introduces concepts such as light workers, planetary spiritual mission, and collective ascension, ideas that echo to this day in spiritualist circles. And what if I told you that much of what we today call extraterrestrial messages was born exactly here, in temples, in silence, in the voices of mediums and occultists? Have you heard of Theosophy? Comment below if you want me to make a video just about it, because this story is deep and full of mysteries. The UFO phenomenon and the new era of contacts. But the decisive leap came in 1947. An American pilot, Kenneth Arnold, sights 9 metallic objects flying in formation over the Cascade Mountains in Washington state. He describes them to journalists as moving like saucers skipping across water, and thus the term flying saucers or flying discs is born, and the world goes into a frenzy. Weeks later, the famous Roswell incident occurs in New Mexico, where an extraterrestrial craft supposedly crashed. Although the American government denies it, the seed of distrust is planted. From there, hundreds of people claim to have seen, felt, or received mental messages from these visitors. The first contactees emerge, people who claim to have encountered beings from other planets. George Adamski in 1952 publishes the book Flying Saucers Have Landed, where he reports his encounter with a Venusian named Orthon in the California desert. Other contactees, such as George Van Tassel, organize conventions in the Mojave Desert where thousands of people gather to hear channeled messages from space beings. And it is in this context that the Ashtar Command emerges, a supposed spiritual fleet from space, led by a being of light who claims to protect Earth from cosmic and nuclear threats. Ashtar Sharan, as he is known, begins to be channeled by different mediums around the world. The communications occurred in trance, through channelers, and the content was always similar: world peace, clean energy, universal love, warnings about nuclear wars, and calls for the elevation of human consciousness. It was as if the ancient angels had traded their wings for spaceships. Traditional religion looked on with suspicion, but for millions of people, ETs became the new divine messengers. Do you believe that this change, from angels to extraterrestrials, was merely symbolic or real? Leave your opinion in the comments, because this point divides spiritualists and scientists to this day. The 60s and 70s, cultural revolution and beings from the stars. In the 60s and 70s, the planet lived between wars, the space race, hippie movements, and cultural revolutions. People wanted peace, freedom, and meaning. It was in this effervescent scenario that the idea of benevolent extraterrestrials exploded. The space race put the cosmos in the collective imagination. Apollo 11 reached the moon in 1969, and suddenly, space was no longer science fiction. It was tangible. It was possible. Channelers began to say they received messages from the Pleiades, Sirius, Orion, and other constellations. Beings who observed Earth with concern and love, wanting to help our evolution without directly interfering with free will. The messages spoke of vibrational frequencies, chakras, universal energy, resonance. All this decades before quantum physics became fashionable in spiritualist circles. There was a distinct language being constructed, a bridge between science and spirituality. These contacts inspired books, movements, and entire communities dedicated to the study and practice of this new cosmic spirituality. The concept of star family was born in this period. People who believe they have spiritual origins in other worlds, who feel homesick when looking at the stars, who carry memories of extraterrestrial lives. This feeling is called starseed, and it mobilizes millions of people to this day. And if you think this sounds unlikely, remember, in every culture, the messengers change name and form. For the Greeks, they were gods descending from Olympus. For Christians, angels sent by God. For indigenous peoples, they were nature spirits and ancestors. For the 20th century, they were beings from the stars. The essence of the phenomenon remains. Only the clothing changes according to the cultural context. The Age of Channeling: Bashar, Cryon, and Abraham. In the 80s, a new generation of channelers appears with full force. The term channeling becomes popular and widely used. People enter trance and claim to transmit messages not only from spirits of deceased people, but from multidimensional extraterrestrial consciousnesses, beings that exist beyond linear time, in elevated states of frequency. This is where Daryl Anka emerges, with Bashar, one of the best-known channels to this day. Bashar presents himself as a being who lives in the future of our timeline, in a civilization called Esasani, the result of hybridization between humans and beings from Zeta Reticuli, the so-called Greys. Bashar speaks with humor, sharp intelligence, and impressive clarity. His messages mix psychology, quantum physics, metaphysics, and spiritual philosophy. One of his most famous phrases is, "You create your reality through the vibration you emit." It sounds esoteric, but also deeply pragmatic and human. That is why millions of people follow his teachings to this day. Other names join this new spiritual wave. Cryon, channeled by Lee Carroll, speaks about the Earth's magnetic energy, planetary energy grids, and the evolution of human DNA. The Pleiadians, channeled by Barbara Marciniak, bring messages about humanity's hidden history, genetic manipulation, and collective awakening. Abraham, channeled by Esther Hicks, popularizes the law of attraction, teaching that thoughts and emotions shape physical reality, each with their own language, but all with the same essence. The universe is consciousness. You are part of it, and your creative power is unlimited. Have you heard any of these channelings? Which one caught your attention the most? Comment below, and if you want, I can make a video breaking down Bashar's most controversial messages, because he talks about things that completely challenge our common logic. What does science say about mediumship? But what does science have to say about all this? Is something really happening, or is it all imagination, fantasy, or even fraud? Serious researchers decided to investigate, and the results are surprising. At the University of São Paulo, psychiatrist Julio Perez coordinated pioneering studies on mediumship using functional magnetic resonance imaging. During the trance of psychography, the brain areas responsible for conscious control, reasoning, and planning drastically decreased their activity, even while mediums wrote complex, coherent texts, often in literary styles different from their own. This means something was happening outside the usual voluntary control. In 2017, a study published by the University of Virginia, led by researchers Emily Kelly and Jim Tucker, found similar results. The brain of a medium in genuine trance appears to enter an authentic altered state of consciousness, neurologically distinct from both sleep and common imagination. Brain waves change, metabolic activity redistributes, and patterns emerge that do not appear when someone is simply making up a story, and more. In experiments conducted at Yale School of Medicine, it was observed that experienced mediums showed less activation in the prefrontal cortex, the region associated with self-evaluation, critical judgment, and sense of identity. In other words, the more surrendered to the trance, the less the ego interferes, which would explain why messages flow so naturally and often contain information that the medium consciously does not know. Studies at the University of Arizona, conducted by psychologist Gary Schwartz, tested mediums under controlled conditions, verifying whether they could obtain accurate information about deceased people without prior access to data. Some results were statistically significant, suggesting that something beyond fraud or guessing was at play. Although controversial, these studies opened doors for more rigorous investigations. But there is a crucial detail. None of these studies proved that the information comes from outside, neither from spirits nor from extraterrestrials. What is known is that something profound and neurologically real happens in the minds of these people, something that science still cannot name or fully explain. Neuroscience can map the trance but cannot say where the transmitted content comes from. Do you think science will one day be able to measure the invisible? Or could it be that the invisible is precisely that which is born when we look within, something that by nature escapes material instruments? The convergence, spirit, mind, or cosmos. When we put all these pieces together, spiritualism, theosophy, ufology, channeling, neuroscience, an almost invisible line emerges connecting everything. On one side, the ancestral human desire to know the universe, to not be alone, to find meaning beyond matter. On the other, the deep will to understand one's own soul, to access hidden layers of consciousness, to touch the sacred. Perhaps they are the same path, with different names. Perhaps ETs are a symbolic language, a modern way of describing spiritual intelligences, collective archetypes, or higher levels of the human psyche. Carl Jung, the famous Swiss psychologist, studied UFOs in the 50s and suggested they could be projections of the collective unconscious, symbols of transformation and psychic totality. Or perhaps, yes, we are really being observed by consciousnesses that vibrate in other dimensions, beings that interact with us in ways that our materialistic science still cannot capture. We do not have definitive proof, but we have clues, experiences repeated over centuries, transcultural patterns, and especially the deep intuition that the universe is far more vast, mysterious, and conscious than our instruments can measure. And perhaps this uncertainty is purposeful, to keep us in a state of search, humble before the mystery. And now I want to know, do you think these voices come from space, or from our own consciousness expanding? Leave your comment. I want to read your view on this because each perspective enriches this investigation. Final considerations. Perhaps the greatest mystery is not in the stars, but in who observes them. Because in the end, we are all travelers, not of space, but of consciousness. And what if the true extraterrestrial contact is, in fact, the encounter with parts of ourselves that we forgot to look at? Parts that vibrate at frequencies that routine, fear, and the noise of the modern world do not let us perceive. If this video made you think, leave a like now. It helps the channel continue exploring the unknown. Share it with someone who loves mysteries, and subscribe to Uncharted Abysses, because here, every week, we descend deeper into the abysses of the mind, the soul, and the cosmos. See you on the next journey.